2 police officers have been found guilty of accepting bribes worth over 100,000 rand in exchange for crushing an investigation into the murder of an ANC leader in KwaZulu-Natal in 2018. And this story, it represents so many bigger stories that really matter in South Africa. Firstly, the extent to which corrupt cops are fundamentally a part of political violence. Secondly, it's a story that reflects the great political violence crisis in KwaZulu-Natal, a province that more than any other is one that is beset by violent thuggery over political positions and political appointments. So let's talk about all this. This is the issue with police corruption in KwaZulu-Natal. You're watching The Issue with Dan Corder. South Africa is a movie. Welcome to the watch party. To really understand how big a story this is, you need to know a few things. Firstly, who was killed? And secondly, how powerful were the cops who were bribed to crush this murder investigation? So the person who was killed was the leader of the ANC branch in Kwandengezi named Thulani Nxumalo. And the 2 cops who were bribed to crush the murder investigation were Lieutenant Colonel Kepu Ndlovu, who is a captain in the National Political Killings Task Team in KwaZulu-Natal. He is a captain in the body that is supposed to investigate national political killings. The irony. The second convicted cop was Captain Bongani Dlamini. And just so you understand how rife corruption, fraud, and bribery is in the police force across the country, but particularly in KZN, do you know where they got their bag of money? The bag was handed to them in the parking lot of the police station they were working at. It is jaw-dropping, but I think that speaks to the level of comfort in the police force in taking bribes to crush murder investigations. And you probably know someone whose docket went missing, whose evidence was tampered with, who for whatever reason in the administration of the police service, their case was bungled to the point that it couldn't see its day in court and justice could not be achieved. But this conviction is really important because it proves in a clear example how cops are getting paid off to allow for and aid and abet political violence, political killings. A fundamental crisis in South Africa is how the justice system is not effectively convicting criminals often enough. And we've all had that sneaking suspicion that if a powerful person knows somebody, they won't get in trouble. Think about KwaZulu-Natal in 2021 with those riots. Think about how everyone spoke at the time about how to pull off this scale of almost instant upheaval and destruction, there needed to be a coordinated plan and must have been put together by some masterminds, but none of them have been caught, tried, had a case against them, or convicted. And a lot of people suspect that they were members of the State Security Agency because that was where Jacob Zuma had his most significant sphere of influence, was over the SSA. Think about how the government was woefully ill-prepared, how they were as shocked as we were, it seems like it was happening. By that level of national security compromise and national security threat, you have to then wonder how they didn't know that that was going to happen, or there was the potential for that to happen. And if cops are corrupted across the country, it's not just political violence, it's all kinds of violence. It's like with the gangs that are so powerful in Cape Town, consistently their leaders seem to be able to get out of court cases. You have to wonder on the extent of the crisis of corrupt officials across the country in all of our police departments. And it's not just that cops are being intimidated and threatened, it's paying them money. And frankly, I have to say, 120,000 rand to crush an investigation into a murder of an ANC branch leader doesn't sound like a lot of money to me for that level of crime that you as a cop are committing. Clearly, the rates are actually pretty low, which suggests that a lot of cops are doing it and willing to do it. So let's talk about the specific context of KwaZulu-Natal, because KwaZulu-Natal, more than any other province in the country, is beset by political violence. We've all seen the stories, now and again caught the pictures, heard on the news about face-offs between different factions from different political parties, hell, even different factions within the same political party. Now, there are a couple of theories about why KZN has worse political violence than anywhere else. I'm going to give you a few of them. The first one is that, and this is true all over the world, the presence of weapons causes more violence. Obvious example, American kids are not more prone to violent gun usage than the rest of the world's kids, but they do have guns around. They do have guns accessible and easily available to them. And it's quite simple, really. Removing guns from a country does cut out extreme violence so quickly because it's not easy access. Australia had a terrible, terrible mass shooting a handful of decades ago. They went on a massive drive to remove guns from everyday life, and they haven't had a mass shooting since. There are other examples, like whenever there is war or there is serious violent conflict in an area, even if peace is achieved, the presence of those weapons in that area causes violence long-term and instability long-term, even if the government remains in power. Libya is a great example. When Gaddafi was overthrown, the whole of country was flooded with weaponry. And that meant that once Gaddafi was overthrown, sure, they created a new government and a degree of peace was restored, but all those weapons were still there for militias to use, criminal networks to use, everyday citizens to use. And KZN is like that because towards the end of apartheid, KZN was a hotbed of political violence, seemingly stimulated and stoked up by a third force in what some people called a low-grade, unacknowledged, simmering civil war in KwaZulu-Natal. Violence between all different kinds of militias, violence between IFP soldiers and ANC soldiers everywhere. And just because apartheid ended doesn't mean that those weapons went away. Those weapons were just absorbed and incorporated into the interests of all kinds of people post 1994. So what that translated to in KwaZulu-Natal was a culture of using political violence to achieve and advance your aims. Across KZN, the culture of politics became one of violence to make resolutions to get what you wanted in a way that just hasn't happened in the rest of the country. And so when you think about these two policemen quashing this murder investigation and think about the fact that corrupt cops like them allow for people to get away with committing political violence, in fact, you should know the person who paid these cops to quash that murder investigation was the wife of the person arrested for the murder of that ANC branch leader. So when you live in an area where political violence is the cultural norm, and you know that you can pay off cops to quash an investigation, thus you know and you're pretty confident you can get away with what you're doing, it makes it all the more likely that you will use political violence as a means to getting political objectives even more than anywhere else in the country. Now, how do you tackle a culture of political violence? It's extremely, extremely hard. And it seems as though KwaZulu-Natal requires specific tailor-made interventions from security forces to deal with that cultural problem. But certainly one thing you could do, which would be incredibly effective, is aggressively, firmly, powerfully root out corruption in the police force. Go after every single captain and lieutenant colonel like these two who you think crushed a murder investigation. Every single time a case gets soured or derailed or destroyed by a docket disappearing or evidence being tampered with or files going missing or witnesses disappearing or witnesses suddenly being unwilling to testify, what we need is for the authorities and our policing forces to basically investigate the derailment and collapse of those cases, of those dockets, to find out which police men and women may have been responsible for those case files, for those dockets, and which police service members may have been involved in the corrupting and destroying of those files. Because we need to fix the propensity for bribery in the police force if we are really going to get justice and root out all kinds of crimes, honestly, but particularly crimes of political violence. So that's the issue with political violence, corruption in the police force, and KwaZulu-Natal. Thank you for watching.